Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Thank you for staying with us. Now, let's begin this morning by trying to put a very important issue in proper perspective. A couple of months ago, we ran a story about the Lagos State chapter of the Labour Party, and in the process of doing so, used a picture of someone else other than the state's chairman, Pastor Dayo Ekong. The picture used was that of someone else. So let's take a look at it.
Now, moving on with a recap of this week's top stories, we have this breaking tragic news of a magnitude 6.8 earthquake that has hit Morocco earlier this morning, leaving close to 300 persons dead and with thousands more injured. The epicenter was in the high Atlas Mountains, 71 kilometers southwest of Marrakesh, at a depth of 18.5 kilometers, the U.S. Geological Survey says. Now, there was a 4.9 aftershock 90 minutes later. Unverified video clips on X, formerly known as Twitter, shows damaged buildings, all the buildings shaking and rubble-strewn streets. People are seen fleeing in alarm and some walking through clouds of dust.
Very sad news there, Aaron.
Yes,
but now it's time for the week that was. Let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. Starting with our top story, President Bola Tinubu's electoral triumph in the February 25 polls has been upheld by the Presidential Election Petition Court. The court dismissed 3 petitions challenging his victory, one by former Vice President Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party, another by the Labour Party's presidential candidate Peter Obi, and the third by the Allied People's Movement, APM. Now, these petitions were deemed to lack merit. However, both the Labour Party and the People's Democratic Party have expressed their intention to appeal the judgment.
Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party and Peter Obi of the Labour Party, 2 men with a chance to pull an upset, had approached the Presidential Election Petition Court seeking to cancel the results of the election and have a rerun, citing a number of grounds. But in Judgment Day, there were the notable absentees in the courtroom, which had in attendance party chieftains including Vice President Kashim Shettima, who were present to witness proceedings. Substantial non-compliance with the Electoral Act, alleged corrupt practices, and overvoting certificate forgery allegations against Tinubu is forfeiture of $460,000 over alleged drug case and dual citizenship, the aspect of his not securing 25% of votes in the FCT, among other grounds that both men sought to nullify Tinubu's electoral victory. In its judgment, the court stated that Atiku and Obi failed to discharge the burden of proof by failing to state the specific polling units where electoral irregularities and overvoting, including multiple thumb printing, occurred. The court stated that the electoral body, INEC, isn't under any legal compulsion to collate results by electronic means, as such falls within its discretionary powers. It also stated that Atiku and Obi failed to prove their allegations of certificate forgery, while stating that the case of alleged forfeiture in a drug case was a civil case, one which Tinubu was never prosecuted, convicted, or sentenced. In dismissing the case on 25% votes in the FCT, the court maintained that the FCT is like one of the 36 states of the Federation without any special status. On those grounds, the court dismissed the petitions for lacking in merits. The court had earlier dismissed the petition of Allied People's Movement, which was hinged on the multiple nomination against Kashim Shettima. With this leg of litigation now over, the petitioners are yet to decide whether they would head to the Supreme Court or not. But the Labour Party has, in a preliminary statement, condemned the outcome of the judgment, saying that its lawyers are reviewing the situation on the next steps to take. Meanwhile, President Bola Tinubu has welcomed the judgment of the tribunal, in quotes, with an intense sense of solemn responsibility and preparedness to serve all Nigerians, irrespective of all diverse political persuasions, faith, and tribal identities. President Tinubu, in a statement, urged, in quote, valiant challengers to inspire their supporters in the trust that the spirit of patriotism will now and forever be elevated above partisan considerations, manifesting into support for our government to improve the livelihood of all Nigerians. End of quote.
Very interesting. On September 6th, the whole nation held their breath, just waiting for this judgment. I remember I was on my 12 to 2 shift. We're just listening on Newsday, listening and waiting for that judgment to be read. 13 hours, about 12 to 13 hours before that.
12 hours plus. One of the longest.
One of the longest.
In the history of the judiciary in
it was
Nigeria.
very important, I believe, for the judges to lay out everything before they now delivered the judgment. And what really stood out for me, looking at the Tsamani-led panel, dismissing all the arguments and the evidence led by the petitioners, because the petitioners, according to them, were not, they didn't bring enough credible evidence. And in the judgment, you could hear how the other judges felt, stressing the same findings in their concurrent opinions. In fact, Ms. Bolaji Yusuf had clearly expressed her displeasure, saying that the election petition is a serious issue. And what she considered, looking at the opposition's petition, was that it was evidence-starved, and of course, the petitioner was not permitted to engage in a fishing expedition or in a roving inquiry as the opposition did. The court also spotlighted procedural blunders committed by the petitioner's legal team. One of such was the court's finding that the petitioners failed to comply with strict legal and judicial authorities that mandate petitioners to file the statements of oath of all their witnesses along with their petitions or before the close of the 3-week window for filing an election petition. Now, the lack of adherence to this led to the court rejecting 10 out of the 13 witnesses called by Mr. Obi and 15 out of the 27 presented by Atiku. Now, because of this, we saw the court expunging all the testimonies of the affected witnesses and the exhibits they tendered. So you can already see that the case was weakening even before it started. Now, there were also a number of substantial number of paragraphs of the petitions that were adjudged to be vague, imprecise, and generic with no particulars. Now, if we now look at, there were about 4 things that this petition was hinged on. Now, we're looking at the polling units, the beavers, the issue of the beavers. We're looking at the $460,000 civil case that President Tinubu had in the U.S. We're looking at the 25% of the votes in the FCT,
the FCT
and of
status.
course, the irregularities in the election itself. Now, when we look at the FCT, for example, now, the argument that was made was that President Tinubu had met the requirement in more than 2/3, or 24 out of 36 states of the Federation. And according to the judgment, all votes are equal as such. And the votes of the federal capital voters should not hold superior value. And I'm happy that we have 2 lawyers coming on the show today to really break down what this means. Because, fine, I understand that Abuja is not the FCT is not a special state, but it seems as if that was what Nigerians were expecting, or that was what was in the law. And then when we also look at the court's dismissal of the issue of the judgment of the U.S. District Court in Northern Illinois, ordering the forfeiture of the $460,000 belonging to Mr. Tinubu, and said that it could not be a basis for disqualifying him from running from the presidency. And like I said earlier, the judgment had held that it was a civil forfeiture and not a criminal forfeiture. Very interesting points to note there. And I think what is also important, to take a break on that, what is important to note is, with all of this that has gone out, now, yesterday, as of Friday morning, Peter Obi's camp, as well as Atiku Abubakar's camp, had come out to say, we've seen the judgment, in the media space. However, our lawyers have still not gotten certified true copies of this judgment. And you know that they have 21 days to appeal. So, this is something that should be looked at as well, because 21 days, we're looking at a case that may not have been at its strongest when it started, but that's what we're seeing here. So it's something that should be worked on, as soon as possible. And then to just talk about, so I can have you also comment, what really stands out for me in all of this is the timing of it. I remember back in, I think it was in April or May, when San Agbakoba had come out to say that, we should find a way to make sure that the presidential election tribunals have a time frame, because we're looking at a president that has already started to consolidate his powers. He's in India right now, trying to look for, trying to bring in money. He has already signed a $14 billion, I would say, MOU, which intends to bring all of that investment into Nigeria. Let's just say, for example, and I know it's not something that has happened in a while, that maybe, PDP or LP had, kind of come out and won this petition. What happens then? Does the president now come back, return? He's already been sworn in, he's already done all of that. So it has to be set in a way that we need to look into the possibility of concluding these petitions before the president is inaugurated and sworn in for future purposes. Aaron.
Now, a couple of things. Let's start it off from this particular. Let me start it off from your last point. Clearly, the Nigerian political space has a lot of learning to do. Not being some people still say that we're still in the toddlers or in nascent democracy that is still evolving. But looking at Kenya and some of the things that are obtainable, these things have all been addressed and in the way they actually run the electoral process, their tribunals, the timing thereabout, 14 days and afterwards 30 days, ensuring that as much as possible, these things were cleared up between William Ruto and Raila Odinga as soon as possible, so that people could actually, like you said, so that the winners could actually focus on governance, because that's the most important thing. Elections should not linger this long. But let's also put it into context, because a lot of people, before this time around, several hashtags were actually making huge trends on social media, which was eyes on the judiciary. And this was an opportunity for the judiciary to actually probably put themselves in a good light, not by peppering towards what the people want. And that's the irony of it, because usually as Justice Ilori, the late Justice Ilori had actually said once, that cases actually lost and won in chambers and not in the four walls of the courts. And as also Nicky Toby, GSC, as it then was, also mentioned that as much as possible, the court cannot go into a fact-finding mission for you. You have to do your own due diligence, gather your facts, and actually present it to the court. And the court will
look at those
adjudicate
facts
based on those facts and not on something else, or not on what the public expects it to actually rule on. And there lies the issue, because when it comes to electoral matters, gathering evidence is a Herculean task. And that has actually disenfranchised people for since the First Republic till now. And it's unfortunate we find ourselves at that particular junction. It's unfortunate that people that were hoping that it swings one way or the other were hugely disappointed. But ultimately, my take home from all that has happened, is that INEC need to do
better.
More. Because all this started from the failings of INEC based on promises that were made, reassuring promises that were made, overwhelming promises that were made, that they will use a particular system, which ultimately became the linchpin and ultimately became the breaking point for several of these issues. It's unfortunate that happened, and we are where we are, and there is nothing the 5 judges could have actually done than to adjudicate based on what was presented before them as against what the people were trying to probably enforce. They have always said that outside interference will never coming to the four walls of the courts. All right, let's move away from that. Let's talk about the fact that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who is in India to take part in the G20 summit, has secured $14.3 billion in investment pledges from the Nigeria-India Economic Roundtable. Let's take a look at the breakdown. All right, about 14.3 billion, like we actually said. And when you actually look at it, Indorama Petrochemical Limited have actually pledged to invest 8 billion. Jindal Steel Power Steel have also said they will put in 3 billion in possible investments. Skipper Sail Limited, 1.6 billion. India Military Industrial Complex, 1 billion. And Bharti Enterprises, 700 million. So, in the meantime, leaders of the world's most richest and most powerful countries are arriving in India for the G20 summits. Security in the capital, New Delhi, is tight for the last 2 days, and diplomatically, the summit presents a challenge for its host, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, China's President Xi Jinping is not attending. Many in India perceive that as a deliberate snub. The war in Ukraine will not be the main issue on the summit's agenda, but it remains a key fault line in international relations. Global challenges on food, energy, security, and climate issues are expected to be discussed.
We are still negotiating, and I don't intend to say something that will make the efforts more difficult. We support the efforts made by the Indian presidency, but this is very clear that the EU position is crystal clear, and we condemn this Russian aggression. We support the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We support the just peace formula proposed by President Zelensky, and we will be always very active to defend those principles and those values in all the different multilateral formats, including in this G20 meeting. Difficult to predict if it will be possible to have an agreement on a declaration.
All right. While a lot of judicial proceedings were going on in Nigeria in regards to the elections, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was not in Nigeria, like we all know, and he was in India trying to align and also bring together the meetings of the mind, a consensus addendum, as they will call it, of business minds to see how the best of the minds, best of the business minds from Nigeria will be able to interface with the best of some of the business minds in India in the bid of trying to draw in investments. Tinubu has always spoken about bringing in investments into Nigeria to try to bolster the economy, and let's just say that, as some will say, he's putting his money where his mouth is by doing that. And kudos to him and the team for actually putting up this boisterous deal. But this, as some would say, is just
the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, because a lot more needs to be done.
Definitely. I mean,
across the plane to ensure that Nigeria, first of all, stops the free fall economically, stabilizes, and we begin to see growth, true growth in the economy, and not just lip service.
Definitely. And when you look at the body language of the president, I mean, we're all wondering, this event doesn't start till the 9th and the 10th. Why did the president leave, on September 4th? And at first, some people were alluding that, oh, maybe it's because of the Presidential Election Tribunal. But we can see that he wanted to get to India in time to be able to have these, fireside chat conversations. And even though it's an MOU, it really shows, the body language of the president. And he did say that his administration would ensure that the agreements manifest, because it's very important. We sign a lot of MOUs, but the implementation, the manifestation in the industries and the jobs on ground in Nigeria. I have to commend all the Indian companies and individuals who responded positively to President Tinubu's administration's efforts to improve Nigeria's macroeconomic and investment climate. And there was a particular video that has been going on where he was saying, don't procrastinate, don't be frightened about investments in Nigeria, bring it on, ask your questions and make them known. Fine, we're bringing all of these opportunities into Nigeria, but we have to make sure that Nigeria in itself is a viable environment for people to come in and be able to spend money. We're still grappling with insecurity. We're still grappling with oil theft. We're still grappling with so many things. You know, we still have our inflation has gone up. There's this a state of emergency has been declared in our food sector. So it's fine that this is happening, but then again, it's very important that the implementation is done right. $14 billion is not small fry. But of course, kudos to this administration.
In the larger scheme of things, 14 billion is not that much.
It's much
in the
more,
larger
yeah.
scheme of things, because the reason we need to put it out there. The reason being that when you look at the liquid cash that a company like Apple does have, then you put it side by side with $14 billion, and then you begin to say that, okay, it's a good start.
Of course.
Because, and I'm happy that this happened, because certainly investors always like to look for stability. And that was why the timing of this particular event coinciding with the tribunal's judgment was probably spot on, because investors probably would have shied away and not maybe follow through if there was an instability, no thanks to, not in terms of civil unrest, but more in terms of change of guard. Because if, for example, the tribunal gives a divergent judgment against Bola Ahmed Tinubu, then investors will maybe just look at it and say, things might not be stable enough for us to actually plunge our investments into it. But things seem to be falling in line for the president, and we're hoping that in the nearest future we'll be able to reap the dividends of all this. Okay?
Definitely.